Imagine stepping out onto your porch on a quiet spring morning, the kind where the air is cool enough to bring a little shiver but filled with the promise of warmth later in the day. The raised bed sits waiting, its surface dark and still like a canvas before the brush meets it. For many gardeners, especially in our later years, the dream is simple: less strain, more beauty, and a garden that seems to thrive with just a gentle touch. What if the answer to that dream wasn't hauling wheelbarrows of compost or bending over with heavy bags, but something so light you could sprinkle it with one hand? That's the secret I want to share with you today. A trick so simple yet so transformative that it has been quietly known by old farmers for generations and is now confirmed by modern science. With just a pinch of natural minerals, you can invite earthworms into your soil almost overnight. And once they arrive, they will do the digging, loosening, and feeding for you. No backaches, no endless piles to turn, just nature lending you its smallest, most tireless workers. Stay with me, dear friend, and together we'll explore how this gentle sprinkle can turn your garden into a living, breathing sanctuary. When you think of the heroes of a garden, it's easy to picture lush tomato vines or bright marigolds dancing in the sun. Yet the truest helpers are often hidden beneath our feet, working quietly where few of us ever look. Earthworms may not seem like much at first glance, but they are the heart and soul of fertile ground. Each time they burrow, they carve out tiny passageways, letting rain sink in more deeply and roots stretch more freely. Each time they eat decaying matter, they leave behind castings, nature's most balanced fertilizer, richer than anything in a store-bought bag. For senior gardeners, these humble creatures are more than soil builders. They are partners who take on the heavy tasks we'd rather leave behind. Think about it: no endless turning of stiff earth, no straining with tools to break up clumps. Worms do it day and night, asking nothing but a bit of balance in the soil. I once spoke with a gentleman in his 70s who said he hadn't owned a rototiller in decades. Instead, he simply let his worms do the digging. His vegetables thrived, and his back thanked him. That's the beauty of it. When we give worms the conditions they love, they reward us with soil that almost seems to heal itself. Plants grow sturdier, harvests grow sweeter, and the gardener's work feels lighter. The secret is remembering that these creatures are not just bugs underfoot. They are caretakers as steady as old friends, ready to carry the burden of the garden alongside us. For many of us, compost feels like the crown jewel of gardening. We save kitchen scraps, rake up autumn leaves, and watch them transform into dark, crumbly matter that smells of life itself. Compost is indeed a gift full of nutrients and organic material plants adore. But here's where many gardeners are surprised: compost alone doesn't always bring worms in droves. I remember a neighbor who devoted an entire corner of her yard to composting. She worked hard at it, turning the pile, watering it just so, and spreading it faithfully over her raised beds. Yet when she dug into her soil, she rarely saw worms. The plants grew, yes, but the underground workforce was missing. Why? Because worms are more particular than we think. They don't just want food, they want comfort. Soil that's too acidic, too hot, or too dry won't keep them around, no matter how much compost we add. Worms seek a home where the balance is right, a place with steady moisture, a soft texture, and the subtle minerals their bodies rely on. Without those, they may pass through, but they won't settle in. And when worms don't stay, the soil remains dependent on us to do the heavy lifting. That's why so many gardeners find themselves puzzled. After years of faithfully adding compost, their worm population remains modest. Something more is needed, something that shifts the soil from good enough to irresistible. The key lies not only in feeding plants, but also in building a welcoming environment for the creatures who keep the cycle alive beneath the surface. Here's where the story takes a turn toward the almost magical. Worms are not simply looking for leftovers from your compost pile. They're drawn to the minerals that give soil its balance. Think of finely ground lime or natural rock dust as the seasoning that transforms a plain meal into a feast. A light sprinkle, just enough to coat the surface like powdered sugar on a cake, can change the entire character of a raised bed. These minerals soften acidic soil, unlock nutrients already present, and most importantly, invite a burst of microscopic life. Bacteria and fungi flourish when these minerals arrive, and it is those microbes that worms love to feast on. In a way, you're not feeding the worms directly, you're setting a table for their favorite meal. I recall an elderly couple in the Midwest who had grown discouraged with their clay soil. After sprinkling a little basalt rock dust one spring, they noticed tunnels and castings appearing within days. By midsummer, their beans and lettuces were thriving like never before. What changed? The worms had found a banquet and decided to stay. Compost feeds plants, yes, but minerals beckon the worms, and together they form a partnership that makes the soil come alive. For senior gardeners, this is liberating. Instead of wrestling with heavy amendments, a gentle dusting of lime or rock powder can spark a transformation that continues on its own season after season. Sometimes the smallest gesture, the lightest sprinkle, opens the door to the greatest abundance. The beauty of this method is in its simplicity, especially for those of us who want gardening to remain joyful, not exhausting. Begin with a raised bed that already has some organic matter. This could be last season's mulch, a bit of compost, or even dried leaves from your yard. Next, take your chosen mineral, whether lime basalt dust or dolomite, and sprinkle it across the surface. Picture dusting a light layer of sugar over a warm pie. Gentle, even not heavy-handed. About 1 to 2 cups per square yard is plenty. After sprinkling, give the soil a good drink of water. This helps the fine particles wash into the top few inches where worms and microbes are most active. Finally, cover the bed with a blanket of mulch. Straw, shredded leaves, or even small garden trimmings work beautifully. The mulch keeps moisture and shields the soil from the sun and offers worms the comfort they crave. Within days, you may notice small wormholes, and within weeks, the soil itself feels looser, almost sponge-like. I once tested this in my own garden. After a month, I pressed my hand into the bed and felt the difference instantly. What had once been stubborn and heavy now crumbled like chocolate cake. That is the quiet reward of this method. It feels as though you've pressed a reset button, letting nature do the hardest tasks while you simply enjoy the unfolding magic. Now you may be wondering, what if you don't have lime or basalt dust nearby? The good news is that nature provides plenty of gentle substitutes, many of which are already in your kitchen. Crushed eggshells, for example, are a wonderful source of calcium. After breakfast, simply rinse your shells, let them dry and grind them into a fine powder. Sprinkle them over your soil, and you'll be giving your garden both minerals and a reason for worms to linger. I know a grandmother in Florida who swears by this method. Every Sunday, she saves shells from her family's meals, and by midsummer, her tomatoes look like something out of a seed catalog. Wood ash from your fireplace or outdoor fire pit is another option. Used lightly, it reduces acidity and brings potassium to the soil. For those raising chickens, oyster shell flour from the feed store works beautifully. And if you enjoy experimenting, products like azomite or glacial rock dust add an even broader spectrum of trace minerals. What makes these choices so appealing for seniors is how easy they are to use. They're light to carry, simple to apply, and often cost nothing at all. No heavy lifting, no complicated equipment, just a sprinkle here and there and you're on your way. These humble household materials remind us that gardening doesn't have to be about spending money. It's about seeing value in what we already have. Sometimes what others call waste is really the very thing our soil has been waiting for. It can feel almost miraculous how fast worms appear once minerals touch the soil. But there's a very down-to-earth explanation. Worms don't have teeth. Instead, inside their gizzards, they use tiny particles of grit to grind food, much like birds do. When you add fine minerals, lime rock dust, or even powdered eggshells, you're giving them the very tools they need to digest efficiently. Better digestion means they eat more, grow stronger, and reproduce faster. There's also the matter of comfort. Worms are sensitive to the soil's acidity. If the ground is too sour or too alkaline, they won't linger. A light sprinkle of minerals nudges the soil closer to neutral, the sweet spot where worms can relax and flourish. I recall visiting a friend's garden where she had struggled for years with acidic soil. After a single application of lime, she called me within a week to say she had spotted more worms than she'd ever seen before. The change was immediate, not because the powder itself was magical, but because it created balance. When soil feels balanced, worms settle in, microbes multiply, and plants begin to thrive. For older gardeners, this is encouraging. You don't have to wait years to see results. Sometimes within days, nature answers back, showing that a gentle adjustment can set a powerful chain reaction into motion. Just like seasoning food in the kitchen, a little goes a long way. For most gardeners, especially those of us caring for raised beds, one sprinkle in early spring is enough to set the stage for the whole growing season. That single application adjusts the soil, sparks microbial life, and invites worms to move in. In places where rain is frequent or soil is naturally very acidic, a second light sprinkle in midsummer may help maintain balance. But the key word here is light. Too much lime or dust can swing the soil too far in the other direction, making it overly alkaline, a condition worms dislike just as much as acidity. I once knew a retired teacher who, eager for faster results, doubled her application. Instead of more worms, she ended up with sluggish soil and plants that looked weary. It was a reminder that nature prefers balance, not excess. The beauty of this method lies in its restraint. 1 or 2 gentle sprinkles each year are all it takes. Think of it less as a chore and more as a ritual. Like seasoning a favorite soup, you're not forcing the flavors, but coaxing them forward. For seniors, this moderation is a gift. No heavy schedules, no endless repeating tasks. Just a simple gesture once or twice a year, and nature gladly takes over from there. What makes this method especially appealing is how easily it folds into a gentle gardening rhythm. Picture the first days of spring. You step outside with a small container of crushed eggshells or rock dust. Sprinkle it across your raised bed, and then cover the soil with a light layer of mulch. Leaves shredded in autumn straw from last season, or even trimmings from your garden will do. After a soft watering, you're finished, the stage is set. From then on, your role becomes lighter. Once a week, if rain doesn't come, you simply give the bed a refreshing drink of water. The worms and microbes do the rest. By midsummer, when you press your hand into the soil, it feels springy, almost sponge-like, and plants look sturdier, leaves greener and blossoms brighter. I think of a widowed gardener I once visited who told me she loved sitting on her porch with a cup of tea, watching her beans climb higher each week, knowing that tiny, unseen helpers were hard at work beneath the soil. For seniors, this routine is not just about reducing labor. It's about reclaiming the joy of gardening without the strain. Instead of battling the earth with heavy tools, we learn to partner with it, and that partnership brings ease, beauty, and peace of mind. Long before garden centers stocked shelves with shiny bags of fertilizer, people leaned on wisdom passed down through the generations. Farmers scattered lime or wood ash across their fields, not because they knew the exact chemistry, but because they saw what happened afterward. Crops grew stronger, soil stayed fertile, and worms were plentiful. In early America, settlers carried sacks of lime alongside their seeds, understanding that without it, the ground would struggle to yield. I once read about a family who farmed the same plot for nearly a century, always sprinkling wood ash after winter fires. Year after year, their soil remained dark, loose, and alive. Today, we can run soil tests and peer through microscopes to explain why minerals matter, but the principle hasn't changed. A sprinkle of the right dust can restore life where the ground feels tired. For seniors, this connection to the past offers comfort. When we scatter a handful of crushed eggshells or dust a raised bed with lime, we are repeating gestures that echo across centuries. We are joining hands in a sense with gardeners who came before us, honoring their quiet knowledge while enjoying the fruits in our own backyard. There's something grounding in that thought that in tending soil, we also keep alive the wisdom of those who trusted the earth long before us. Attracting worms is already a gift, but the ripple effects go much further. As worms tunnel, they create hidden networks that act like tiny irrigation systems. After heavy rains, those passages drain excess water, sparing your plants from drowning. During dry spells, the same tunnels hold on to precious moisture, meaning you water less often. Worm castings, the small dark pellets they leave behind, are another treasure. They contain nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in perfectly balanced forms that plants can absorb right away. I once spoke with a retired nurse who told me she had stopped buying commercial fertilizer altogether after noticing how her soil changed once worms multiplied. Her roses bloomed fuller and her peppers grew sweeter than she could remember. Beyond nutrients, worms coat soil particles with a sticky substance that helps roots cling to what they need while still breathing freely. The result is soil that stays rich and resilient instead of washing away with every rainstorm. Plants grown in worm-active soil often resist disease more naturally, standing taller and looking healthier season after season. For older gardeners, these benefits are more than science, they are freedom. Less watering, less fertilizing, fewer worries, and more time to enjoy the garden itself. One sprinkle truly sets in motion a chain of blessings that continue long after we've set down the watering can. Perhaps the best proof of this method comes from gardeners themselves. I remember a woman in Florida who had nearly given up on her sandy soil. She spread compost year after year, but worms never seemed to stay. One spring, she began saving eggshells from her breakfasts, crushing them into a powder and sprinkling them across her raised beds. Within weeks, she noticed little mounds worm castings dotting the surface for the very first time. That summer, her tomatoes stood taller and produced more fruit than she had ever seen. Far across the country in Oregon, a retired couple struggled with heavy clay that felt like cement. They tried basalt rock dust, sprinkling it lightly before mulching. By midsummer, they told me their soil crumbled in their hands like chocolate cake. Worms were everywhere, and their lettuce grew so lush that neighbors often stopped by just to admire it. What ties these stories together isn't harder work, but smarter choices. Instead of pushing themselves to dig or haul endlessly, these seniors found ease in partnering with nature. The worms did the labor while the gardeners enjoyed the results. These examples remind us that transformation doesn't always require force. Often, it's a gentle adjustment, a sprinkle that brings lasting change. One of the most beautiful gifts of this approach is how it sets your garden up to thrive on its own. When worms find conditions they like, they don't just visit, they settle in. They feed on microbes, mulch, and decaying roots, and in turn their castings enrich the soil with every passing day. As they reproduce, new generations continue the cycle, tunneling, loosening, and fertilizing without pause. Over time, your soil becomes a living ecosystem, constantly renewing itself without your constant effort. I once met a gardener in her 80s who told me she hadn't turned her raised beds in over a decade. Instead, she sprinkled minerals each spring, kept the beds mulched, and let the worms handle the rest. Her soil was so soft and alive that her grandchildren loved to dig in it with bare hands. This is the promise of a self-sustaining system. Instead of wrestling with the land, you collaborate with it. Your role becomes lighter, providing mulch, water, and the occasional sprinkle, while the worms and microbes take care of the heavy work. For seniors, that means more time spent enjoying the garden and less time straining over it. It is quite literally gardening made easier by nature itself. Of course, no two gardens are the same, and sometimes results take longer than expected. If your soil feels dry and powdery, worms may hesitate to move in. In that case, the solution is simple: water more often. Moisture is what allows them to travel and feed comfortably. If your soil is heavy and compacted, give it a gentle loosening before sprinkling minerals, just enough so the worms can find their way through. In regions with scorching summers, worms often retreat deeper underground to escape the heat. That's where mulch becomes your greatest ally. A thick blanket of straw, shredded leaves, or bark helps shield the soil from harsh sun, keeping the surface cool and inviting. And if you still don't notice worms right away, don't be discouraged. Nature sometimes takes her time. I once guided a retired couple in Texas who didn't see worms until nearly 2 months after their first sprinkle. But when they came, they multiplied quickly, turning the soil dark and crumbly by the following season. The key is patience and trust. When the right balance of moisture, texture, and minerals is present, the worms will find their way. Think of it as setting the stage. Sooner or later, the cast of quiet workers will appear ready to perform their magic beneath your garden. For those of us who have gardened for decades, the aches and strains of bending, lifting, and hauling can sometimes overshadow the joy. That's why this method feels so refreshing. It reminds us that we don't always have to push harder to see better results. By sprinkling a bit of mineral, laying down mulch, and letting worms take over, we reduce the heavy labor while still enjoying abundant harvests. A friend of mine likes to say, "The older I get, the smarter I garden." She no longer worries about turning compost piles or dragging heavy tools across her yard. Instead, she trusts the quiet workers beneath her soil. Her peppers stand tall, her beans climb eagerly, and she enjoys it all from the comfort of a nearby chair. This approach is more than a trick, it's a shift in mindset. Gardening doesn't have to be exhausting to be rewarding. Sometimes the best results come from ease, from letting nature's cycles carry more of the load. For seniors, this lesson carries weight. We can continue to garden with joy, but without punishing our bodies. Less labor, more life, that's the gift worms bring when we simply invite them into our soil. So here we are, dear friend, at the end of our quiet walk through the garden's hidden wisdom. What we've learned is simple but profound. Building fertile soil doesn't always require backbreaking work or expensive products. Sometimes it takes nothing more than a gentle sprinkle of minerals, lime, rock dust, eggshells, or even a bit of wood ash to tip the balance and invite worms to flood in. Once they arrive, they loosen stubborn clay, enrich sandy ground, and leave behind castings more nourishing than any fertilizer you could buy. Best of all, they keep at it endlessly, asking only for a little moisture and mulch. For us as senior gardeners, this is more than convenience. It is a reminder that gardening is about partnership, not struggle. When we lean into nature's rhythms, we discover that the smallest creatures can shoulder the heaviest burdens. I encourage you to try this in your own raised bed. Sprinkle lightly, cover gently, and watch as life begins to stir beneath the soil. Share the idea with a neighbor or teach it to a grandchild so the wisdom continues. And if this message has brought you joy, consider joining me again by subscribing so we can keep exploring these gentle, sustainable ways together. Until then, may your garden be a place of ease, beauty, and quiet magic, proving that sometimes all it takes is one sprinkle to change everything.